It is late Wednesday, October 2nd, 2013, and although we are now past the climatological peak of hurricane season, it's not to say that you cannot get a threat here early in October. It is very common to see tropical activity continue, and even though it's been a relatively inactive season, we can still get some late season major activity. And it looks as though we have one area to watch very closely. It's this area of low pressure in the northwest Caribbean, and the Hurricane Center is now giving this feature a 70% chance of development into a tropical storm within the next 2 days. Earlier this afternoon, the hurricane hunters investigated the broad area of low pressure in the Caribbean, and what they found was a very elongated low pressure center. It was not well defined or closed off enough for them to upgrade this to the next tropical depression of the season. But interestingly, they did find tropical storm force winds in some of these more intense convective bands, meaning once we do see a little bit more in the way of organization, the Hurricane Center will likely bypass the tropical depression criteria and automatically make this Tropical Storm Karen. Now, once we do see an upgrade, the Hurricane Center will go ahead and issue their 3 and 5 day forecast tracks, which will, in all likelihood, aim towards the central or northeast U.S. Gulf Coast. In terms of the trends with regard to the structure of the area of low pressure over the past 6 to 12 hours, beginning with the initial part of this animation, you can see that this was a rather broad area of convection. Nothing was overly focused or concentrated, but within the past 3 hours or so, we've seen another convective blow up, and it all seems to be organizing around the primary mid-level circulation, which has been the dominant circulation that you're seeing on all of the satellite imagery. And a lot of people have been surprised that this isn't quite a tropical cyclone just yet, just because it does look fairly impressive without looking at just the hurricane hunter data. But just by looking at the satellite, one would think that this could already be a tropical storm. So we're definitely not that far off, and especially given the trends with it looking a little more concentrated here just to the east of Cancun and Cozumel, I would not be surprised at all to see an upgrade within the next 24 hours. As we take a more regional view using the water vapor imagery, you can see that out across the northwest Caribbean and southeast Gulf of Mexico, we have a favorable upper level ridge which is conducive for tropical cyclone development. And the thing that gives it away more than anything else on this satellite is the fanning of the outflow, especially out towards the north and northeast into even South Florida. And that is a sign that the tropical low is being ventilated quite well, and the upper level wind shear in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere is light to moderate. So conditions overall are conducive for at least slow strengthening. And a couple factors that are really helping to pump the ridge out across the southeast Gulf and western Caribbean is first and foremost this area of upper level low heights, or the upper level low to the east of the Bahamas. You see this amplifying and digging towards the southeast. And secondly, we also have a short wave trough out across the lower Mississippi Valley. Now this trough is going to eventually lift more so towards the north, but more important than anything down the line will be this trough that you see starting to enter the picture coming out of the western United States. The forecast model guidance has this trough swinging out of the western U.S. into the central and Gulf Coast states. Now, depending on how close this trough gets to the upper level ridge, that is going to make all the difference. If it starts to swing too close to the northern Gulf, then this was going to help to initiate more in the way of southwest vertical wind shear, which will make any system in the Gulf rather weak and also lopsided to the east, meaning all of the convection will be mainly to the east of the center as it makes landfall. But if the trough hangs back just a little bit longer than expected, then that could give the time for the upper level ridge over the eastern Gulf of Mexico to amplify, and that would also induce more of a strengthening tropical system as it lifts northward. The following is the 18Z run of the American GFS model, and we're looking at the mid-level steering flow. And you can see initially we do have a very weak area of ridging that is centered over the eastern seaboard from Florida northward into the Carolinas, but you can also make out the shortwave trough that we just outlined on the water vapor imagery. And over the next 24 to 48 hours, you see that trough quickly lifting towards the northeast and also slowly beginning to dissipate. And as we get into 36 hours, you can see the tropical system well to the southeast of New Orleans. It is slowly lifting more so towards the north. And as we go into the 72-hour time frame, our storm, at least based on this model, is beginning to approach the Florida Panhandle. But as you can see out towards the west, we have a long wave trough stretching all the way from Minnesota southwestward into New Mexico. And out ahead of this trough, you're going to have very strong southwest winds in the mid to upper levels of the atmosphere. And if this trough progresses just a little bit quicker than the GFS is showing, then any system in the northern Gulf is likely to be highly sheared. However, the GFS is keeping the distance between the storm and the trough there just enough to where we are seeing a strengthening system, and this is what we have as a result as we turn to the 900 millibar low-level wind speeds along with the sea level pressure. As we go into Thursday and Friday, we have at least a tropical storm situated to the south of Mobile, Alabama. And as we go into late Saturday night into Sunday morning, we have a strong tropical storm or borderline Category 1 hurricane projected by this model, starting to move northeast out ahead of that trough, and it makes landfall fairly close to Apalachicola, Florida. Based on this solution, most of the tropical depression force winds would remain just offshore all the way up until about noon on Saturday, but as we go into later on Saturday afternoon and into the Saturday evening and overnight hours, you can see at the very least tropical storm force winds beginning to impact Florida between Pensacola and Perry, Florida. And as we go into late Saturday night and Sunday morning, this is the general timetable for a landfall in that area. And again, based on the GFS by itself, you would be looking at strong tropical storm force winds all the way around Cape San Blas, extending northeastward even into the Tallahassee area. So you would anticipate heavy rainfall and the likelihood of sporadic power outages. On the flip side, there are still several models, including this run of the ECMWF, which is keeping the area of low pressure a lot more elongated and relatively weak, and it also shows a track more so towards the west into southeast Louisiana. And even if this track were to verify in this solution altogether, you would still be looking at enhanced rainfall from Louisiana eastward into Mississippi and Alabama as it begins to interact with the cold front as it starts to sweep through the southeast in association with that trough that we mentioned coming out of the western United States. However, it should be stated that the European has missed several of the tropical storms that have formed in the Atlantic Basin during the 2013 season, and it very well could be underdoing the intensity of this Caribbean low. At this point, we expect more of a compromise between the European and GFS solutions, with a landfall somewhere along the central Gulf Coast as a moderate tropical storm. The latest consensus amongst the spaghetti models would also support a track between Biloxi, Mississippi and Destin, Florida. You see many models ranging anywhere from central Louisiana eastward all the way through Apalachicola, Florida. So the GFS solution is on the right-hand side of the model consensus. So we can anticipate a trend a little bit more so towards the west. That is the expectation over the next couple of model cycles. But keep in mind, if we get a landfall as far west as southeast Louisiana, in that event it would likely be a little closer to the trough, and the wind shear would likely be a little greater. So even if the center were to track that far toward the west, some of the heavier precipitation totals would likely still end up anywhere from Mississippi on eastward. At least that is the general thinking as of this evening, and this is still subject to change somewhat, and all interests out across the central and northeast Gulf Coast are advised to monitor the progress of this low very closely as we go into the second half of this week and especially on into the weekend. So thank you for tuning in on this late Wednesday evening. Please stay tuned at 28storms.com along with our Facebook and Twitter accounts for rapid updates throughout the day tomorrow and throughout the duration of this event.